Theodore knelt on the cold tile floor of their modest Chicago home, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. "Son, there's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice cracking under the weight of years of hidden truth. "I'm gay." The 11-year-old boy, with his mother's soft brown eyes and his father's stubborn chin, looked up from his video game controller, his face a mask of calm that belied his young age. "I know, Dad. I've known for a while. But if you get a boyfriend, does that mean you won't be my dad anymore?" Those words, so innocent yet so piercing, hit Theodore like a sledgehammer. His vision blurred, his knees gave way completely, and he collapsed onto the floor, sobs racking his body as the room spun around him. How could his son have known? And why did the thought of losing him feel like the end of everything? Sarah had already left for her evening shift at the hospital, leaving the apartment quiet except for the distant hum of traffic on Lakeshore Drive. Theodore had planned this moment for weeks, rehearsing in the mirror while Kai waited patiently on the other end of a late-night call. He had imagined anger, tears, questions about why Mommy and Daddy split up 2 years ago. He had not imagined this cool acceptance mixed with a fear that cut deeper than any rejection. His son, Jamie, simply set the controller down and knelt beside him, small hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, Dad. I just don't want things to change too much." Theodore could only pull him close, breathing in the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo and boyish sweat, wondering if he had just broken the one relationship he had sworn to protect above all else. The collapse lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. When Theodore finally sat up, wiping his face with the sleeve of his faded Northwestern sweatshirt, Jamie was already back at his game, though his thumbs moved slower now. Theodore stood on shaky legs, walked to the kitchen, and poured himself a glass of water he didn't drink. Outside the window, the Chicago skyline glittered against the early evening sky, indifferent to the earthquake inside apartment 4B. He thought of Kai waiting in his loft downtown, probably pacing in that minimalist space with the exposed brick walls they had painted together last summer. Kai, with his easy laugh and steady hands, had become Theodore's anchor after the divorce. But tonight that anchor felt dangerously far away. Memories rushed in without permission, pulling Theodore back to a time before Chicago, before Jamie, before he even had a name for what he felt. He had grown up in a sleepy Ohio town where Friday nights meant football under stadium lights, and Sunday mornings meant church pews that smelled of polished wood and guilt. At 16, he had kissed a boy named Marcus behind the bleachers after a homecoming game, the kind of stolen moment that tasted like freedom and terror at the same time. The next day, he asked a girl to the winter formal and told himself it was just a phase. College in Michigan only made the lie heavier. He met Sarah in a sociology class, fell into the expected rhythm of dating, engagement, marriage. When Jamie arrived 5 years later, Theodore told himself he was finally whole. The move to Chicago for the advertising job at Sterling and Rowe had seemed like a reward for all that pretending. Then came the company retreat in Door County, the one where he first locked eyes with Kai across a conference table. Kai was the new senior designer, fresh from New York, with sharp cheekbones, kind hazel eyes, and a quiet confidence that made Theodore's chest tighten every time their paths crossed in the open-plan office. Their first real conversation happened over bad coffee at the hotel bar. Kai had asked about the family photo Theodore kept on his desk. Theodore had lied smoothly the way he always did. But later that night, when Kai suggested a walk along the lake path, something shifted. They talked until the stars came out, and for the first time in 38 years Theodore felt seen without having to perform. Jamie's voice pulled him back to the present. "Dad, are you crying because of me?" Theodore shook his head, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass. "No, buddy. I'm crying because I waited too long to tell you." He sat on the couch and Jamie climbed into his lap the way he had when he was smaller. They stayed like that until Sarah's key turned in the lock. Theodore knew the real conversation was only beginning, and the weight of it pressed down harder than the floor he had collapsed on minutes earlier. Sarah's reaction was quieter than Theodore expected. She set her purse on the counter, took one look at his red eyes and Jamie's serious face, and simply said, "We need to talk in the morning." She kissed Jamie goodnight, then disappeared into the guest room she still used on the nights she stayed over for Jamie's sake. Theodore lay awake until dawn, replaying every choice that had led him here. At 6 he texted Kai, "He knows. It didn't go how I thought." Kai's reply came instantly, "I'm here. Whatever you need." The simplicity of those words anchored Theodore enough to get through breakfast with Jamie, who acted as if the previous night had been just another bedtime story. Work that Monday felt like walking through fog. The Sterling and Row offices buzzed with the usual Monday energy. Interns rushing with coffee orders, account managers shouting across cubicles. But Theodore moved on autopilot. Kai found him in the break room, pretending to study the vending machine selections. "You look like you haven't slept," Kai said softly, keeping his voice low even though the room was empty. Theodore managed a half-smile. "I collapsed on the floor in front of my kid." Literal collapse. Kai's hand brushed his for the briefest second, a touch no one else would notice but one that sent warmth through Theodore's entire body. "We'll figure it out. Together." That afternoon they stole 40 minutes in the small park across from the office tower. Autumn leaves swirled around their feet as they sat on a bench far from the paths. Theodore told Kai everything. Jamie's exact words, the fear in them, the way the boy had still curled into his lap afterward. Kai listened without interrupting, then spoke with the calm that had first drawn Theodore to him. "Kids are resilient, but you're right to be scared. Society doesn't make this easy." Kai shared his own story then, the one he rarely told. Growing up in Queens with a single mother who worked double shifts, Kai had come out at 17 after his mother found a note from his first boyfriend. She had cried, then hugged him and said, "Just don't let them break you." The memory always steadied Kai, and now it steadied Theodore too. The weeks that followed blurred into a careful dance. Theodore and Sarah sat down with a family therapist who specialized in LGBTQ+ families. Jamie attended one session and asked the therapist point-blank if having two dads meant he would get teased at school. The therapist's honest answer, "Some kids might say things, but you have a right to your family," seemed to satisfy Jamie for the moment. At work, rumors began anyway. Someone had seen Kai and Theodore leaving the park together. A colleague named Marcus, ironically sharing the name of Theodore's first kiss, made a pointed joke in a team meeting about alternative lifestyles. Theodore's stomach dropped, but he kept his face neutral. Kai suggested they keep things professional at the office, at least until things settled. The sacrifice stung, but Theodore understood. One Friday night Kai drove them to a quiet cabin in Wisconsin they had rented under a friend's name. No Wi-Fi, just a fireplace and the sound of wind through pines. For 2 days they talked without filters. Theodore admitted the guilt that still woke him at night. Guilt for lying to Sarah, for waiting until Jamie was 11 to be honest, for dragging Kai into the mess of a complicated family. Kai held him and said, "Love isn't clean. It's messy and brave. You're being brave now." They fell asleep tangled together under heavy blankets, and for the first time since the collapse Theodore felt something close to peace. Monday brought reality crashing back. Sarah called during lunch. "Jamie asked if Kai is your boyfriend." I told him the truth. "He wants to meet him." Theodore's hand tightened around the phone. The request should have felt like progress, but the fear of what Jamie might see or say made his chest tight again. He agreed to a casual Saturday brunch at a pancake house near the lake. Kai wore his favorite blue sweater, the one that made his eyes look almost green. Jamie arrived with Sarah, clutching a drawing he had made. Stick figures of two men holding hands with a smaller figure between them. "That's us," Jamie said simply. Theodore felt tears threaten again, but this time they were different, lighter, like the first crack in a dam that had held back too much for too long. Brunch stretched into an afternoon at the park. Jamie and Kai bonded over a shared love of video games and bad puns. Sarah watched from a bench, her expression unreadable but not hostile. Theodore sat between them all, feeling the fragile new shape of his family. When they said goodbye, Jamie hugged Kai without prompting. "You're cool," he declared. The simple words carried Theodore through the next week at work, even when Marcus cornered him in the copy room and muttered, "Some of us have real families to think about." Theodore walked away without answering, but the comment lodged like a splinter. Thanksgiving arrived with its usual pressure. Theodore's parents flew in from Ohio, expecting the traditional meal at Sarah's new condo. Sarah had agreed to host so Jamie could see both sides of his family. Kai stayed away at Theodore's request, but the absence felt like a missing limb. Over turkey and stuffing, Theodore's father launched into his usual speech about traditional values. Jamie, who had grown bolder since the coming-out talk, suddenly spoke up. "Grandpa, Dad has a boyfriend now. His name is Kai and he's really nice." The table went silent. Theodore's mother dropped her fork. His father's face turned the color of the cranberry sauce. Sarah tried to smooth things over, but the damage was done. Later, in the guest bedroom, Theodore's father said quietly, "We raised you better than this." Theodore answered, "You raised me to be honest. I'm finally doing that." The drive back to Chicago that night was quiet except for Jamie's soft snoring in the back seat. Theodore called Kai from the car once they were on the highway. "It went badly with my parents." Kai's voice was steady. "They'll come around or they won't. You have people who love you as you are." The words helped, but the ache remained. Christmas was worse. Theodore's parents declined the invitation, citing health reasons. Jamie noticed and asked why Grandma and Grandpa weren't coming. Theodore told the truth in the simplest words he could find. Jamie's response surprised him again. "Maybe they're scared like I was at first. But I'm not scared anymore." New Year's Eve found Theodore and Kai on the rooftop of Kai's building, watching fireworks bloom over the lake. Jamie was with Sarah, but they had FaceTimed earlier so Jamie could wish Kai a happy new year. The moment felt like a turning point, small, quiet, but real. Yet the coming months would test that fragile peace. At work, the annual performance reviews loomed. Marcus had become the new account director and made it clear he intended to clean up the team. Theodore's projects were suddenly reassigned. Kai suggested they document everything, but Theodore resisted, afraid of rocking the boat further. Instead, he threw himself into a new campaign for a local LGBTQ+ youth center, pouring every ounce of his hidden years into the work. Spring brought unexpected warmth. Jamie started bringing home drawings that included Kai more often. One showed all four of them, Sarah, Theodore, Kai, and Jamie, at a baseball game. Sarah saw it and smiled for the first time in months. "He's adjusting," she said. "We all are." Theodore and Kai took Jamie to his first Cubs game in April. The sun was bright, the crowd loud, and when Kai bought Jamie a foam finger and they all cheered together, Theodore felt the collapse of that kitchen night finally beginning to heal. But healing is never linear. One evening Jamie came home from school with a black eye and a story about a boy who called his dad weird. Theodore held his son while he cried, then drove straight to Kai's loft. "I don't know if I can keep protecting him from everything," he admitted. Kai pulled him close. "You don't have to do it alone." Summer arrived with its humid Chicago heat and a new crisis. Sterling and Rowe announced layoffs. Marcus called Theodore into his office on a Friday afternoon and slid a severance package across the desk. "It's not personal," he said, but his eyes said otherwise. Theodore left the building carrying a cardboard box of his things, feeling the old panic rise again. Kai met him at the elevator, took the box without a word, and drove them straight to the lakefront. They sat on the rocks watching sailboats until the sun set. "You'll find something better," Kai said. "And until then, I've got you." The offer was generous. Kai's freelance income had grown, and he suggested Theodore take time to figure out what he really wanted. For the first time, Theodore considered opening the small design studio he had dreamed about since college. Jamie's reaction to the job loss was protective in a way that surprised everyone. "Does this mean we can't afford my soccer camp?" he asked. then immediately added, "It's okay if we can't. I like hanging out with you and Kai more anyway." The three of them spent the next weeks exploring the city. Bike rides along the lake, museum afternoons, late-night ice cream runs. Theodore watched Jamie and Kai build a bond that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with genuine liking. One afternoon at the Art Institute, Jamie stood in front of a painting of two men embracing and asked Kai, "Is that what love looks like for you and Dad?" Kai answered simply, "Yes. And it's worth every hard day." The hard days were not over. Theodore's parents called in July, asking to visit. They arrived on a Saturday morning, stiff and formal. Over coffee, his mother finally spoke the words she had practiced. "We don't understand, but we miss our grandson. And we miss you." His father remained silent, but when Jamie ran in and hugged them both, something in the old man's shoulders softened. They stayed for the weekend, even meeting Kai for a careful dinner. No one used the word boyfriend, but no one used any ugly words either. It was progress wrapped in awkward silence, and Theodore took it. By August, Theodore had registered his studio as an LLC. Kai helped design the logo, and Jamie insisted on being the first official tester of the new website. Clients trickled in, small nonprofits, local businesses, one even from the youth center Theodore had campaigned for. The work felt honest in a way the corporate job never had. Evenings were spent at Kai's loft or the apartment, the three of them, sometimes four when Sarah joined, creating new routines. Jamie started calling Kai by name without hesitation, and once even slipped and said, "My other dad," before catching himself and blushing. No one corrected him. Yet the past refused to stay quiet. Marcus, now at a rival agency, leaked a story to a local business blog suggesting Sterling and Roe had diversity issues that led to the layoffs. The article mentioned Theodore by name. Comments online were brutal. Theodore read them late one night after Jamie was asleep and felt the old collapse threaten again. Kai found him on the couch, laptop open, and closed it gently. "They don't get to define us," he said. "We do." They sat together until sunrise, talking about everything and nothing. When Jamie woke up, he sensed the tension and simply climbed between them with his blanket. "Family hug," he declared. The three of them stayed like that until the coffee was ready. Fall brought school pictures and parent-teacher conferences. Jamie's teacher pulled Theodore aside after the meeting. "He's more confident this year. He talks about his two dads without shame." The words landed like a gift. Theodore drove straight to Kai's studio and repeated them verbatim. Kai's smile could have lit the entire city. That weekend they took Jamie to a pride festival in Boys Town, not as participants but as observers. Jamie wore a rainbow wristband and asked 1,000 questions. At one booth he picked out a small pride flag for his bedroom. "So everyone knows it's okay," he explained. Theodore's throat tightened with pride and relief. Work at the studio grew steady. A major client, a national mental health organization, hired them for a full campaign centered on LGBTQ plus youth. Theodore poured late nights into the project, Kai handling the visuals while he wrote the copy. One night Jamie stayed up helping glue storyboards together, declaring himself junior creative director. The laughter in the loft that night felt like the final piece of a puzzle sliding into place. Sarah joined for the launch party, and for the first time the four of them stood together in public without tension. Photos from the event showed four smiling faces under string lights, and Theodore pinned one to the studio wall. Winter arrived with its short days and long nights. Theodore's parents called more often, even inviting Kai for Christmas in Ohio. The trip was tentative but warm. Jamie skated on the same pond Theodore had skated on as a boy, this time with Kai holding his hand when he wobbled. On Christmas Eve, around the tree, Theodore's father raised a glass. To family, however it looks. It was the closest thing to acceptance they had ever heard from him. The drive back to Chicago felt lighter than any trip before. Yet growth always has its tests. Jamie turned 12 in February and asked for a birthday party that included both households. 20 kids from school filled the apartment. When one boy asked why Kai was there, Jamie answered without hesitation, "Because he's my dad's partner and he makes us happy." The simple declaration silenced the room for a second. Then the party continued. Later, Jamie told Theodore, "I used to be scared people would laugh. Now I think they'll just have to get used to it." Theodore hugged him until Jamie laughed and pushed away. Spring brought another milestone. Theodore and Kai decided to move in together officially. They found a larger place near the lake with a room for Jamie on weekends. The moving day was chaotic and joyful. Boxes everywhere, pizza on the floor, Jamie directing traffic like a general. When the last box was unpacked, they stood on the balcony watching the sunset. Kai slipped an arm around Theodore's waist. "We made it," he whispered. Theodore looked at Jamie, who was already claiming the best spot on the new couch, and felt the last remnants of that kitchen floor collapse dissolve into something stronger. Something built on truth, choice, and love that had survived every storm. The new apartment became home in ways Theodore had never imagined. Mornings smelled of Kai's coffee and Jamie's cereal. Evenings filled with homework help, design revisions, and the occasional argument over whose turn it was to do dishes. Sarah visited often, sometimes staying for dinner, and the four of them developed a rhythm that felt remarkably ordinary. One night Jamie looked up from his math book and said, "I used to think families had to look one way. Now I know they can look like us." The sentence hung in the air like a benediction. Theodore's studio won a local award for the Youth Center campaign. At the small ceremony, he thanked Kai publicly for the first time in front of colleagues and family. "None of this would exist without the man who taught me that being honest is the bravest kind of love." Kai's eyes shone under the lights. Later, walking home along the lake path, Jamie between them, Theodore felt the full circle of the journey. From that shattering moment on the kitchen floor to this quiet, steady happiness. Life continued with its ordinary miracles. Jamie made the soccer team. Kai's mother visited from New York and immediately adopted Jamie as her bonus grandson. Theodore's parents sent birthday cards that now included Kai's name. The world had not become perfect, but it had become kinder because they had chosen to live truthfully in it. Theodore still woke sometimes with old fears, but now he turned to Kai or looked at Jamie and remembered why the collapse had been worth it. On the anniversary of that first confession, the three of them returned to the same kitchen, now in the new apartment, and cooked spaghetti together. Jamie lit a candle for courage. They laughed about the night Theodore had literally fallen apart, and how far they had come. Later, when Jamie was asleep, Kai and Theodore sat on the balcony under the same Chicago stars that had witnessed their first real talk years ago. "Would you do it all again?" Kai asked softly. Theodore answered without hesitation. "Every single hard day." The answer to that question is what keeps families like theirs moving forward, through prejudice, through doubt, through every unexpected reply a child might give. True or false? A father's honesty about his sexuality is always worth the risk of changing everything his child thought they knew.